Civilization, a turn-based strategy game and prime example of the 4X genre, has been around for 25 years now, and recently we had the release of its latest installment, Civilization 6. As such, it carries with it quite a lot of weight and especially has to hold up to its predecessor, Civilization 5, that has ended up as an excellent title after the Gods and Kings and Brave New World expansions. Civilization is essentially one of the best digital board games out there. Its scope is quite immense as you start with but a small group of settlers and set out to explore the entire map you've been given. And through planning and a lot of patience, see this small faction of yours dominate the hex-based globe in one of various ways. It's a game in which you have to be mindful of your surroundings, as every tile type has a different impact on your economy and production, making exploration key for proper exploitation of the map. A game in which you have to pay attention to what the opposing major factions are trying to achieve, and a game in which you have to create your own plan of action as you go through the various historic ages. All the while, of course, making sure that a pesky barbarian tribe isn't setting your farms ablaze. And in this regard, nothing has globally changed. Having spent over 80 hours throughout multiple games ranging from the Emperor to the toughest Deity difficulty, Civilization 6 is basically a remake of Civilization 5. It'll feel familiar to anyone who has played it before, and it isn't difficult to adjust to the major differences it does have. Though the details will take a lot of work, especially because of the less than stellar UI. So what has changed? What truly makes a big impact, and where does Civilization 6 take a different turn? First of all, by far the biggest general change of gameplay comes in the form of so-called districts, and as it turns out, it's a tremendously enjoyable change. In Civilization 6, when a city is able to construct something, and a district is available, which is based on the city's population number, it will appear on a menu for you to select. Districts come in various shapes for different purposes, and after selecting your district of choice, you now have to decide on which tile it'll remain for the rest of the game. It plays very well into the exploitation of the map, and makes planning even more important, as districts get different adjacency bonuses depending on other districts and the surrounding terrain. The campus, or science district, is great next to a mountain or a jungle. Industrial districts benefit from hills and even spread to other nearby cities in the later stages of the game. Commercial and harbor districts benefit from being next to each other, and holy sites, the religious districts, are optimally built around mountains and wonders. Or depending on your chosen pantheon, can have other adjacency bonuses from, say, tundra. All the while, an encampment placed on a good choke point can make for a solid defensive position. Proper use of these districts is now one of the most important elements of playing Civilization 6, especially on the higher difficulties, and planning out which you need and where is absolutely crucial. Certainly, some are going to be optimal to use regardless of what you are doing, but even on the Deity difficulty you can get away with ignoring, say, a theater or culture district, depending on your chosen faction. Maybe you never actually need to build a harbor depending on the map, and you can almost entirely ignore holy sites if religion is not your goal. Not to mention, the neutral city-states pitch in here as well, as they can give bonuses such as science or culture, mainly allowing you to reevaluate whether you need a specific district in a specific city or not. Though, why you can't demolish a district on the same turn that you decided to build it on is beyond me. In the end, districts play so well into some of the core exploitation and planning philosophies of Civilization, and they make the whole game look much better. No longer are buildings just a number on the list. They're physical, they're, well, there. You can take a glance at a city and see what it is doing. It's a very satisfying improvement, if just from a visual perspective. And visually, Civilization 6 has certainly taken a different turn as well. To go on a slight detour here, Civilization 6 no longer is shooting for the pseudo-realistic art style it used in Civilization 5, it now has a cartography-inspired, clean, stylized art style that is easy to read and allows for a lot of great animation work throughout. Units in general look a lot more interesting. Scouts have dogs with them, for instance, which bark during fights. Horses run away after their rider is killed, and different factions have different looking basic and unique units. The day and night cycle looks great and shakes up the otherwise relative monotony of looking at the same screen for hours, and to link back to the buildings, improvements and districts, these are noticeably different depending on whether they're being worked on or how effective they are as well. Simply put, Civilization 6 looks great. But districts aren't the only major change to the way cities function. In Civilization 6 you no longer have the happiness system of Civilization 5, which, personally, as a player who preferred making a wide empire, meaning more than 5 cities, is an absolute godsend. City population and satisfaction in Civilization 6 is now governed by housing and amenities, which is different for every individual city. In essence, it means that a problem in one city isn't going to affect another, allowing you to expand your empire as much as you'd like. There are a few other systems in place here, but basically in Civilization 6 it is almost never wrong to expand, and it is definitely the dominating strategy, but small clusters of cities can still function well due to district bonuses, and against the AI you can still play tall, meaning smaller empires, without a doubt. Players who do prefer the tall playstyle might be saddened by this, but mainly I don't feel like Civilization 6 is as much of a tall versus wide story anymore. You're dealing with what you've got time for and when, it's less of a main concern. A third major gameplay change comes in the form of the new Civic Tree. Alongside the technology tree, Civilization 6 now uses a civic tree that you'll spend your time navigating through during the entirety of the game, and doing so rewards you with the possibility to build certain wonders and structures, but is mainly done for the policies you unlock, which are visually represented by cards. The civics tree then can have a major impact on your playstyle, though in some cases will be easily ignored, which isn't necessarily a bad thing as there is plenty to manage already. It offers up a customizable talent tree of sorts for your entire faction that has a few optimal passives to unlock depending on what victory condition you are going for, and a large number of situational increases that, when timed correctly, definitely can have a big impact. Ultimately, you won't lose or significantly suffer for hand-waving it, but if you do play your cards right, it will be a nice boost and award you for good planning. Furthermore, great people have had a significant change. Certain buildings and policies grant you great people points, which are divided into numerous different types, such as riders or generals. In Civilization 6, great people are then something to actively contest over, as every great person is now unique and can only be unlocked once. This gameplay element is essentially another possible fight over control against the other factions, and makes the entirety of the game more active, as you will need these people to achieve victory, especially the cultural victory, and now have to pay attention to whether or not you can get them before another faction can. Their individual uses are now also a lot more interesting, with a great general that can end up retiring to make a great work of art, or great engineers which reward you with luxuries such as toys for your civilization. Spies are then another reworked element. They now have to be built, similar to combat units, and are sent on more specific missions that target districts. They've always functioned as a combat mechanic, and still are, but their use is now a lot more interesting, as they can steal funds from an enemy, or even entire great works of art. Not to mention they can shut down production or sabotage a spaceport to stop an enemy from advancing their science victory, all based on a percentage chance that is influenced by their level and whether or not you've had them prepare first. If they do get caught, they will attempt to escape, and may end up captured or killed. In case they are captured, they can now even be used in diplomatic trade. All of these changes work together to create more inherent conflicts while trying to achieve one of the 4 different victory conditions in the game. And it says a lot that I've enjoyed every single one of these conditions more so than before. On that note, the religious victory has replaced the previous diplomatic victory, and it is quite fitting, as it requires a peaceful playstyle of sorts, even though you send out hordes of apostles to convert the enemy cities. Religion inherently isn't immensely important in the game, and if you prefer to ignore it, you can easily do so while pursuing one of the other victory conditions, as the religious bonuses this time around don't feel all that impactful for the work you've put in, but makes for a nice alternative playstyle. Essentially, the way it works is you build up as much faith as quickly so you can create a pantheon, which then can be upgraded through the use of a great prophet into a full religion. Once you've done so, you have to accumulate more faith in order to create missionaries, apostles, and inquisitors to spread your religion while removing the enemies from your own cities. And it tends to have a nice chain reaction of sorts, as enemy factions that don't spend time gathering inquisitors will end up advancing your religious spread. You do have to stay peaceful though, and as such it is required to be quite diplomatic, as enemy combatants can instantly kill religious units if you do end up going to war, which drastically lowers the impact of your religion in an area. Essentially, it is a whole different playstyle that brings about its own conflict and feels like a worthy addition to the game. Now, all of this has to hold up to one major element of the game, at least when playing it solo, and this is where we approach the 2 main flaws of Civilization 6. The AI and the UI. The AI, simply put, is very wonky, and oftentimes plain terrible. This, however, wasn't necessarily different in Civilization 5, and I'd say that if you were fine with the level of AI there, you would be fine with the level of AI here. Mainly, it shows itself being terrible more often than it did before, as it now has a lot more messages that it prompts you with, which shows you how weird it can be. Diplomacy and AI now feature so-called agendas, which come in two varieties. One agenda, which is leader-specific, and one hidden agenda that is somewhat randomized, and you have to find out through playing. The concept of the agendas itself is fine, it contains predictable and unpredictable elements that could shake up the game, but the execution doesn't work. For one, they should be a side goal, as opposed to the seemingly main goal of the AI. And secondly, they should be changed, as a lot of them are simply not improving the enjoyment of the game. Brazil, for instance, hates it if you ever obtain a great person, Congo hates it if you don't spread religion to his cities, and he will appear the very moment you've created a religion with absolutely no time to actually spread it. Germany will get upset if you deal with any city-states, which is particularly annoying as you naturally do so through the various quests they give you that can be virtually anything and isn't something you in practice keep an eye on, resulting in you pissing off Germany because you will inevitably end up dealing with the city-state somewhere on the map. Add on to that the AI is far worse than a human player at pursuing these agenda goals, even on Deity difficulty, and you'll end up in a situation where China will constantly hate you for building more wonders than they did, even though they hardly ever made an effort themselves. Just as annoying are the constant border warnings the AI will prompt you with, even though you are simply keeping your army on your own border, which is only logical. And as a result, you'll end up breaking these border treaties constantly, despite having moved no units there in dozens of turns. Meanwhile, the AI doesn't even care that you're cutting down trees right next to their capital city with your workers, which is extremely efficient in Civilization 6, and you end up in a situation where they constantly get upset with you for seemingly all the wrong reasons. Neither does it seem that the AI really advance with the game's mechanics in any way, as their district placement is far from optimal even on Deity difficulty. They don't often protect their settlers while moving them, nor do they ever seem to make archers by far the best thing to create in the early game, or go for planes and nukes in the late game. At least, not from my experience, which certainly may vary as the AI is hard to nail down and is simply not very well executed. Suffice to say, I found it very difficult to actually lose a Deity game once I got to the later stages of the game and had caught up with the initial difficulty bonuses they are given. The second flaw, and easily one of the biggest steps down from Civilization 5, comes in the form of the UI. Now, visually, I actually think it is one of the more pleasing user interfaces they've used thus far, but ultimately it lacks from a practicality and user-friendly standpoint. The UI doesn't show a bunch of passive civic or technology increases, such as unlocking more city-state envoys with certain civic upgrades. It doesn't show you the distribution of religious followers in a foreign city that lack a dominant religion. It doesn't even have a production queue anymore. And once you get to the late game, it will constantly prompt you to keep renewing your social media and future tech research, which is simply incredibly tedious. Not to mention, it doesn't show district adjacency bonuses after they've been built, the in-game manual has taken a big step back and doesn't explain much, and the new gossip mechanic, which is a nice concept, is simply bloated with tons and tons of useless information, such as enemy cities having built structures that have absolutely no impact on your own game plan. The UI needs a major overhaul. UI and AI, far from the best, but ultimately I have very much enjoyed my time with Civilization 6. The fact that it introduces so much more conflict to the game is simply great. Almost every core gameplay element I ultimately found more enjoyable than before, be it the more aggressive early start, which means you have to absolutely be on your guard early game and seriously get archers, they are basically the best thing ever, to the districts, great people competitions, or more unique unit promotions. Virtually every core gameplay element has improved, and I can easily say that Civilization 6 is an incredibly good base game, worthy of your many hours of time.
I am fond of pigs.